The Jets head to Charlotte this weekend for week 2 of preseason action. It's the Jets against the Carolina Panthers. Of course, wins and losses in the preseason don't really matter, but this game is critical for the players we're going to talk about today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, August 16th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, today we're going to talk about the Jets' second preseason game of 2024. They play the Carolina Panthers tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern. The game will be in Charlotte, and it will be broadcast locally on WCBS2. The great Ian Eagle will be on the call. Yesterday, we talked about this game, and we talked about players who are going to play key roles for the Jets in 2024. And how this game could impact them. Today, we're going to turn our attention to guys who maybe won't have such a big role on the team this year, but this game is critical for them because they're just fighting for a roster spot. And there are a handful of players who I think are worth discussing. And, when we talk about the significance of preseason, it really matters for the guys at the very back of the roster. When you're talking about the guys who make it, guy number 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, those last couple guys, preseason can really make a difference because frequently those decisions are very close decisions. It's very close to the 53rd player versus the 54th player. Not an easy call. And sometimes what happens on the field in the preseason can tip the scales in the direction of one player or another. And part of that goes back to something we talk about a lot on this show. Training camp's not what it used to be. And I'm not saying that as like a judgment statement. I'm not like I try never to be like one of those guys who talks about the good old days where things were so much better. It's just different, whether or not it's better or worse. Training camp these days is different. There are no more 2-a-days, back 15, 20 years ago. And well past that, you had what were known as 2-a-days, where there were 2 practices a day. There was one in the morning and one in the afternoon. That's been phased out by the collective bargaining agreement. The collective bargaining agreement, which is essentially the agreement between the players and owners that sets the rules of the league, has also really scaled back the intensity of practices. This is something that players really fall for because the players don't like a lot of hitting going on at practices. So the impact of this is that you don't get as good a view on how guys are going to perform in game situations because practice simulates game situations less than it has in the past. So that means these preseason games can really matter when you're talking about who grabs one of the last roster spots. And the first guy I have on my list to talk about today is Leonard Taylor, who was an undrafted free agent signing out of Miami. At the time it was made, there was a lot of praise for the Jets for this signing because there were some in the draft community online who thought that this was a guy who could have been an early day 3 pick. Now, of course, he was not. The team's actually making the decision decided he was a non-drafted player, but Taylor was a guy who, a year ago entered the season as somebody who seemed reasonably likely to get drafted, and things just did not pan out for him. Jets signed him as a non-drafted free agent. Guy probably worth a look, and had a big first game of the preseason. Had a sack, had a tackle for a loss. I wrote an article breaking that down yesterday on GangGreenNation.com. So if you want to take a look at that, you can see what happened. Long story short, the tackle for a loss was just a completely busted blocking assignment, and Taylor fired up the field and made the tackle. And that's not to take away from what Taylor did, because as I wrote in the article, part of succeeding in the NFL means when your opponent gives you a gift, you take it. You don't give it back. There are plenty of instances in the NFL where an opponent gives you a gift and you mess up the opportunity. So Taylor made the tackle. The sack, which came in the fourth quarter, was very impressive, where he kind of, he angled his body correctly. He was one-on-one. He got matched up one-on-one against the guard and just kind of overwhelmed him, threw on what was a good rip move. You essentially started firing, started off the line of scrimmage at the middle of the guard, then broke inside and used his hands to neutralize the guard's ability to contact him and disrupt him. So it was a very good opening performance by Leonard Taylor. I think Taylor's a guy who's, he faces an uphill battle to make the roster, but sometimes what you see in preseason is guys essentially force their way onto the roster. Guys force their teams to hold on to them. And Taylor, I think, needs two more games like that. I think that this is a guy who probably clinched a practice squad spot for himself with his week 1 performance. Now, the question is, can he get onto the active roster? And it's not going to be easy because the Jets have really 4 defensive linemen who are locks. Quinnen Williams, let's go out on a limb and say Quinnen Williams is going to be on the team. Javon Kinlaw, who received a fairly lucrative 1-year contract from the Jets. Leki Fatu, signing from Arizona. And then, of course, our old friend Sullivan Thomas, who, seems to re-sign for a 1-year contract with the Jets. It's not impossible to think the Jets could keep 5 defensive tackles, but you don't need to keep 5 defensive tackles. So I don't know that Taylor's necessarily going to beat out any of the top 4 guys. I think the question is whether he forces the Jets to keep a 5th guy. And to the extent he can do that, I think what he has to do is he has to be so dominant that the Jets get scared that if they put him on waivers, that he'll be claimed. Because at the end of training camp, what happens is you keep 53 guys. Everybody else needs to be cut. Now, players with more than 4 years of experience, they just become free agents. Their contract's over, it's finished. They can go sign whoever they want. Players who have less than 4 years go through what's known as the waiver process. And essentially the waiver process, the 31 other teams all have a chance to say, hey, I want that guy. And if one of the 31 other teams says, I want that guy, they get the player and they just absorb his Jets contract. And if more than one team says they want a player, well, then it comes down to the draft order. The team with the higher first round draft pick last year gets him. So I think going back to this, what Taylor needs to do is Taylor needs to put it in the Jets' head that he's so dominant that the Jets don't want to risk exposing him to the waiver process. And look, that's not going to be easy because I think at this time of year, even guys who play really well, you have to remember other teams have scouting reports on them. And the other 31 teams, they scouted Taylor in the pre-draft process. None of them drafted him, which suggests maybe he's not super high on their list. So maybe the Jets can sneak him onto the practice squad no matter what. But I think what Taylor wants to do is he wants to get it to a point where, like, the Jets, if they have any doubt, they view this guy as like such a promising piece of their future that they say, we don't want to risk it. We just want to keep him on the roster. So, I think Taylor is going to need some more splash plays. He looked explosive in the first game. He showed an ability to, use his hands to counter offensive linemen effectively. I want to see more of it. I thought I was really encouraged by what I saw. You start training camp and you always hear there's always like 5 undrafted free agents people hype up. And usually like 1 or 2 of them ends up actually making the team. And Taylor was one of the 5 who, got a lot of hype this year. And through one preseason game, I think you have to like what you see, and there is an opportunity here. I think. I mean, it's still an uphill battle for Taylor, but it's no longer completely inconceivable after a very strong opener in the preseason. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to a different guy. This is a guy who's maybe not ascending, a guy who maybe the Jets have brought in replacements for. At the running back position, Jets are loaded with young talent, and there could be an odd man out. Even though he scored a touchdown in the first preseason game, he could use another big effort against Carolina to stake his case. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue discussing Jets players whose jobs may depend on, or whose 53-man roster spots may depend on a good preseason performance. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. But it's not just Major League Baseball tickets you can buy at Gametime. You can do other sports, concerts, theater, comedy, you name it. Gametime's got it. I've used Gametime myself. I can't get over how easy it is to use. Every time I've used Gametime, it's just been an hour or 2 before my event. Pulled out the app, couldn't believe the deals I got. And you also can see the view from your seat. They have pictures of your seat, so no surprises when you show up. You don't have to worry about some obstructed view that you weren't expecting. Gametime has it all. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now discussing preseason week 2, Jets, Carolina, and Charlotte tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, locally on WCBS2 if you're in New York. Jets looking to build on what was, I think, a really solid performance week 1 against the Washington Commanders. A touchdown scorer in that game was Izzy Abanikanda, but Izzy's facing an uphill battle to make this roster right now. It's not entirely clear, whether he's going to be able to make it. Will the Jets keep a 4th running back? I think that's the question for Izzy. And, I think for the Jets to consider keeping a 4th running back, Izzy Abanikanda is going to have to show you something. Look, I think on some level, and the Jets would never admit this, but the fact the Jets drafted a pair of running backs on day 3 of this year's NFL draft, I mean, that's a sign they weren't all that confident in Izzy Abanikanda. Maybe that wasn't the only reason. I'm sure Braylon Allen looks great so far. I think that probably played a role, probably played a bigger role in it. But I don't know that you draft a running back in the 4th round if you felt like you were completely set with your number 2 back. And there was a lot of surprise when the Jets drafted Braylon Allen and then Isaiah Davis, because I think people assumed that Izzy Abanikanda was a lock to be on the team. And looking back, I'm not entirely sure I understand the perception that Izzy Abanikanda was a lock to be on the team. Because if you think about it, I mean, he was a late round pick last year, and he didn't get much of an opportunity. But he didn't, and I understand it was a tough situation. The Jets did not run block particularly well last year, but he didn't really do a whole lot with the limited opportunities that he got. So, and I thought even in preseason, I know last year some of the numbers looked good and there were some highlights in the preseason last year, but I felt like on a play-to-play basis, I mean, he didn't look that spectacular. He's fast. I don't know that the speed necessarily translates to game situations, or at least from what I've seen so far, and it needs to. And I do think that there is there is a pathway for Abanikanda to make the roster, but that involves the Jets keeping 4 running backs. And it kind of goes back to what we were saying with Leonard Taylor, where I don't know that Abanikanda can surpass anybody who's ahead of him on the depth chart right now. Essentially, it's just getting to a point where you feel like you got to keep this guy, whereas there's enough talent there that he's worth developing, that he's worth keeping around. And, this is easier said than done. I think the guy Abanikanda is really the guy Abanikanda's got to figure out a way to be equal with, at least, is Isaiah Davis, because look, Breece Hall's number 1 back on the team. I would not expect to see Breece Hall on the field Saturday. And if he is, he probably won't be on there for long. Braylon Allen looks like the real deal at this point. I don't want to put too much on the kid. I know that there's still a long way to go. He's only played 1 preseason game in the NFL, so I'm not ready to declare him a success. But everything we've seen so far for Braylon Allen suggests that he's got a shot to be a player in this league. Isaiah Davis, as I mentioned yesterday, I felt like there were some good things in his debut, but not what we saw from Braylon Allen. So the question for Abanikanda is, look, Davis is probably going to be on the team just because he was a draft pick this year. And a draft pick this year has a better shot at making the team than the draft pick last year. The draft pick this year, you have more invested in. You don't have a year of, and you don't have a year in the books. So if Abanikanda can get to the point where he's ahead of Davis, maybe that's the path where you feel like you're better off with him as your number 3 running back. And the other aspect of this is, can Izzy Abanikanda help out on special teams? Because I do think that when we're talking about these last couple spots on the roster, when you're talking about 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, the Jets in particular under Brant Boyer and under Robert Saleh, I think Saleh really consults with Boyer and asks Boyer the guys that he wants to keep. So can Izzy Abanikanda help on special teams? Maybe that's as a return guy. Maybe the Jets give him a look there. Maybe it's, can he help on the coverage units? These are things worth considering because, we can look through the Robert Saleh tenure. He clearly values Brant Boyer's opinion. Now, in 2021, Del'Shawn Phillips had a roster spot. Del'Shawn was not really a big time linebacker, but the Jets kept him around because he was a good special teamer. Jets signed Justin Hardy as a free agent in 2022, a guy who's purely a special teamer, a guy who technically was listed as a corner, but would only have ever played corner in an emergency situation for the Jets. Irv Charles making the team last year. Irv Charles is, I think it's fair to say Irv Charles is never going to be a great receiver, but he stuck on the team because they liked how he played special teams. So the question with Izzy Abanikanda, there are many questions, but one of them is, can he step up? Can he become a quality special teamer for the Jets? And perhaps that's a path to the roster for him. But ultimately, I think another way he could just earn a spot on the roster is flashing some of the speed that he's got, because I just don't feel like it's shown up yet. And admittedly, we've seen this in limited action, but especially in Abanikanda right now, I think it's an ominous sign that he was playing as deep into the game as he was last week. I think that one of the things I watch when I tune into the preseason is the order players come in, because that generally gives us a clue into how the coaching staff used the depth chart. And Breece Hall not playing, that means Breece Hall is the number one back. Braylon Allen being the starter in preseason, that means he's the number two back. Isaiah Davis being the next guy in after him, that means he's the number three back. Izzy Abanikanda going in after Davis, signings behind everybody. And that's a tough thing to do. And we can talk about, and as I mentioned, I think Izzy's path is to keep four running backs, but keeping an extra guy at one of the lowest value positions on the field, that's a tough sell unless there's a reason to do it. And I think the two reasons would be either Izzy showing he's better than Davis to be the number three back and the Jets just keep Davis because he was a draft pick, or Izzy flashing on special teams and showing he can help the Jets there. I think Izzy Abanikanda, he's in danger right now. And there's a chance he may still end up on the Jets practice squad. I would expect him to end up on the practice squad somewhere, but this is not the lock that people thought he was going to be heading into the 2024 offseason. I think a lot of people figured Izzy Abanikanda was penciled as the number two back. Now he's in a fight to make the team. And this game, I think, will play a role in determining whether or not the Jets can find a spot for him. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to the tight end position. There's kind of a logjam at the position. There's a real opportunity this weekend because there's going to be a lot of playing time available due to the way the Jets handle preseason, and a certain injury. And we'll go into more detail on who's in the competition as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals who are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Of course, the Jets, when they scout these players, they have a full scouting staff in the front office. Use LinkedIn as the scouting staff in the front office for your small business. LinkedIn is not just a jobs board. It helps you hire quality professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire, so LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Friday. Jets and Carolina Panthers tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time from Charlotte. It is the second of three preseason games for the New York Jets in 2024. Today we're talking about players who have a lot on the line in this game as far as roster spots go. Jets will need to cut down to 53 men before the start of the regular season. This is the second of three opportunities for players to show the coaching staff what they can do in a game situation. I don't want to talk about the tight end position because I think that there's kind of a logjam at this spot for the New York Jets. Now, I think, as we know, Tyler Conklin's the number one tight end. It seems like Jeremy Ruckert has the number two tight end job locked down. So the question becomes, who's the third tight end? And will the Jets keep more than three? And it's not easy to say, but what is easy to say is that the players competing for these roles are going to have ample opportunities in this game because, again, Robert Saleh, ever since he took over as Jets head coach, very hesitant to play the starters much, if at all, during preseason games. So, if the starters play at all, which I would guess they won't play that long. So that's Tyler Conklin. Jeremy Ruckert's a little banged up. So I'm not expecting to see Jeremy Ruckert in this game. So that means Kenny Yeboah. It means Zach Kuntz. It means Anthony Ferkser. These guys will have an opportunity to show what they can do. Now, of these three guys, I think Ferkser actually may have a bit of an inside track, even though he has the shortest tenure of any Jet, of any of these players with the Jets. Although Ferkser was with the Jets many years ago. He initially signed with the Jets as an undrafted free agent, and then they cut him that first training camp, and he went on to play with some other teams, most notably Tennessee, and actually had some pretty solid seasons. But I think Ferkser might have an inside track to a roster spot because he's a guy who has experience playing the fullback role. And of course, as we know in today's NFL, it's not typically common for a team to keep a player who only plays fullback. Every team has formations where there's a fullback, there's a lead blocker, but more and more those roles are filled by tight ends. It's just another aspect of the tight end position, that you go along with inline blocking and, a guy who's plays an H-back role and, flexing out to the slot and the tight slot and even flexing out wide. Another role, the tight end role has a number of roles. The tight end position has a number of roles, and one of them has become kind of playing the fullback spot. So Ferkser does that effectively. He'll have a real shot to make the team. And then Yeboah versus Kuntz comes down to a couple factors. I think Yeboah was a guy, if you looked at when he returned to the lineup last year, now he missed most of the year with an injury, but when he returned to the lineup last year, he got a lot of playing time on special teams. So going back to what we were saying, it certainly feels like Brant Boyer has a voice at the table when the Jets make their final decisions on roster spots. Because your number 3 tight ends, I know the Jets had some games last year where they played some jumbo formations, but the number 3 tight end is probably not going to be the guy who plays that big of a role. And even in situations where you play 3 tight ends, your number 3 tight end is not going to be the featured guy on any of those plays. It's probably not, the difference between what you get between one guy and another is really probably not that great. So special teams could play a role. Plus, special teams could make a big difference. And Yeboah's, I don't know how good Yeboah was on special teams, but Boyer seems to like him. So I think one other thing worth watching is does Kuntz, how much time does Kuntz get on the coverage units and what can he do? Can he show that? Can he flash an ability to play in coverage? The other aspect of this will be just upside. And, I don't want to go overboard talking about Kuntz's upside because this guy was a 7th round pick for a reason. But, his athletic testing was through the roof. It was he produced some of the best athletic testing any tight end has produced in recent memory. Now, of course, just being a great athlete doesn't necessarily make you a great football player. The NFL is loaded with great athletes who don't necessarily play their position effectively. But, I think the idea of upside could come into play here. A guy who has great athleticism, is he likely to become a great player? No, but your imagination kind of takes off and you start to think, if we could figure out a way to teach this guy to play technique consistently, we can't teach this athleticism. And that's the type of thing that could favor Kuntz as he tries to get a roster spot. So, Jets may keep 3, they may keep 4. I think all of these players have something in their favor. For Ferkser, it's the experience playing the fullback spots. The Jets are going to need somebody to play that role. They're going to have formations where they run a fullback this year. Yeboah, nobody has said it explicitly that they love Yeboah on special teams, but there's the old saying, show, don't tell. Last year, the Jets showed us that they like Yeboah on special teams because he played a lot on special teams when he was active. And then Kuntz, it's the athleticism. It's how much will the Jets buy into the upside. Even though I'm not particularly that sympathetic to that argument, the Jets might be. And look, the Jets liked him enough to use a draft pick on him last year. So part of it's going to be how much does Kuntz show? Can Kuntz, first of all on special teams, but also, can he look like he makes plays? Can he look like he can utilize that athleticism to maybe make big plays down the seam? Maybe take a screen and do something with it. And if he does that, then maybe you're a little hesitant to cut him. Maybe you're thinking, if this guy can put it together, he can be an asset for our offense. Maybe we can find a role for him. These are the things that will be worth considering. And because, we're not going to see Conklin much, if at all, in this game, and because it sounds like Ruckert's a little banged up, those are the two guys who are your top two tight ends. So everybody else is going to get an ample opportunity to show what they can do and show that they deserve a spot on this roster. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Enjoy the game. We'll be back on Monday to talk about it.